having a watch lets you tell the time without being tempted to do other stuff on your phone.
And then all of the people who own the actual Omega Speedmaster were like, oh my God, they're making a mockery of the brand. They're making a mockery of our iconic watch, the watch that went to the moon. This is now a budget kid toy watch.
Arguably, all watches are a waste of money, but that is kind of that's kind of an insane take. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Carry the Way, the weekly podcast where we nerd out about all things EDC gear and mispronounce things while we're at it. I'm Bernard, the founder of Everyday Carry, and I'm joined by our editor, Mikey.
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
It's going good. So, today in this episode, we're finally talking about watches and how they can fit into your everyday carry. While within the EDC community, there are sub-communities for knife enthusiasts and bag collectors, I'd argue the watch community is just much, much bigger overall. So whether you're into EDC stuff but haven't gone down the rabbit hole of watches, or if you're already a watch appreciator, I think you'll find there's something for you in today's discussion. But before we get into that, Mikey, what is on your wrist today?
Ooh, good question. Mine comes with a story. If you'd allow me to kind of like nerd out straight away. So
all right. So anyway, on my wrist,
okay, go ahead. So mine is the Blackout Formula One from Tag Heuer. And this was the watch that Jason Bourne was wearing in the fifth and last movie. So kind of like a big nerd about Jason Bourne in general and that aspect of his kit, his watch. He carried a different watch in 3 of the first movies, and this is the one he wore in the last movie. And I'm kind of like a movie buff, and that was one of the EDC things I kind of latched on. So we'll get to it in the later on discussion, but I'm curious to see what you're wearing also.
This is the Grand Seiko SBG W289. I think I'm just gonna hold it up here. Yeah, this is like probably the first luxury watch that I bought recently. I got this same time I got COVID, actually. That was unlucky. So that was what, 2022 or something.
Right up your alley. That's a very Bernard design.
Yeah, it's like a dressy, sporty kind of watch, 100-meter water resistance. It's like a Seiko, but nicer. And the dial is like really cool. So yeah, my favorite brand, I think, right now, at least, in terms of watches, Seiko.
Yeah.
I love them.
I think I mentioned it in our prized possessions episode, but yeah, Seiko was also what got me into watches. It started with like a simple search of what is the best lume, because I was kind of nerding out about flashlights, and I was like, I wanted like something atomic nuclear on my wrist, and then up comes up in a list of super powerful looms was the Seiko Monster at the time. So that started it all for me, pretty much, for the brand also.
Yeah, so this Seiko doesn't have a lume, unfortunately. And it's crazy, like how expensive it is. Doesn't have lume, but that's like a stylistic thing. But speaking of Seiko, it's kind of just like, why are we even talking about watches this week in particular? So to be honest, I was looking at our analytics and just like, what is the most popular content that I've produced so far? And far and away, it was like this video on this like $100 Seiko 5, so the SNX S79. And if this will focus, it kind of looks like a Datejust, but it's not. And this kind of went viral, and like some of the similar discussion about watches kind of went viral. So I'm like, damn, like a lot of people who aren't even into EDC are commenting on this stuff. So I think like the watch scene is just really big.
People really care about it. People really care about their watches. Once you get into it, you just go down a specific lane and you just kind of like get really serious about it. If you choose to go down that lane. Yeah.
So, but there's some people who are probably following this into everyday carry stuff, and maybe they haven't gone down that lane. So why should somebody who's into everyday carry care about a watch, or even like consider a watch part of an everyday carry? Like, I think we both agree that watches count as everyday carry. There's some people who might be pedantic about the semantics of like everyday carry. Well, you don't carry a watch, you wear a watch, and it's not in your pockets or in your bag, so it shouldn't count, right? But let's just say that they're wrong. And for the purpose of this episode, EDC includes watches. But why?
Yeah, because we also mentioned this before. The number one argument that people are going to say is, bro, you've got a phone. There's a giant watch right in the front and center of it, even when it's closed. why do you want to put like an additional thing on your wrist? So that's the question we're going to try and answer today, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we could just try answering it right now.
It's two-part. It's a two-parter for me. One is the practicality of it, and the other is the story about it. Um,
Hmm.
the practicality of it is sometimes it's just more convenient for me to just turn my wrist over and then I see the time. And I guess like being like older, I know how to tell the time pretty fast. Like it's kind of interesting to me that a lot of people don't prefer analog watches because it's slower for them to tell the time than like a fully
Mm.
digital watch. But for me, it's like I grew up with analog clocks, so like it's kind of second nature to me. It's probably faster even for me than to look at a digital display. So there's just that practicality of I just want to turn my wrist. I know exactly what time it is. Good to go. Um, and then the story behind it. Like I said, this watch in particular is a memento. It's a memorabilia from a movie series that I like. I have the counterpart of it that came out in the first three movies, and it kind of like became part of like my personal history, like self-expression, my own personal hobby, my own crossover into like movies and stuff. And I'll have more stories as we go along, but all of my watches have a story or have a purpose behind them. I've already gotten rid of most of my stuff that don't have the story attached, but everything I've kept in my collection, specifically watches, all have
Mm.
a story or a personal anecdote or a history that came with me from another hobby, from like in like a turning point in my life or like a milestone. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
those are the two things for me: practicality and the story behind the watches. What about you?
Interesting. Well, I just want to respond to that, or at least your two things. I would probably agree that you could separate like why you would think about watches into those two things. One, you said practicality, and two is kind of like beyond that, more of a sentimental thing, or just like an assigned value
Mm,
beyond the practicality, right?
mm,
So this makes me think of already like trying to get philosophical, but you know, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
mm.
where there's just like the base fundamental practical things,
Yeah, like food and
you know,
shelter
like
and
food and
stuff.
shelter, right? But then
Yeah,
above that, there's like self
watches.
actualization, you right? No, not watches. Yeah, are at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But no, it reminds me of just like there's this base functionality. Now, you know, as we're talking about everyday carry,
Mm,
of just telling the time, right? You have a dedicated tool to tell the time, but
mm.
then now you're adding all these layers above it, like self-expression,
Self-expression. Yeah.
personal, sentimental connection to it, and stuff like that. I don't think that any of those, the latter part, the higher parts of that hierarchy or triangle, will probably appeal to somebody who's listening now when we're just trying to figure out this question of why should you as an EDCer care.
Mm,
So I'm trying to like ground this more in the just the base bricks of this triangle.
mm,
And one would be like the, like you said, practicality of telling the time. And I think it's more interesting when you compare that to the fact that you can do this on your phone already.
mm,
This is sort of when we get into a lot of debates about like what your phone can do versus what your dedicated core EDC can do. We've talked about this a little bit before in the flashlight episode.
mm,
Why carry a dedicated flashlight when your phone has a flashlight in it? I
mm,
think a lot of the same arguments can be made with your phone to a watch. So one, besides just like you having a watch lets you tell the time without being tempted to do other stuff on your phone. At least that's one thing for me, coming from sort of like a perspective of digital minimalism and like productivity and focus and that sort of thing. Like
mm,
I work on my phone already, and there I just know that there's like a lot of things that I could be looking at instead of just like, am I on time, or like, am I keeping the right track of time for whatever task I'm working on. And this is an aside, but I think it's interesting that I like watches maybe more than, say, like knives, for example, because I can use my watch any time of day, whereas there are only certain specific conditions where I'm using my knife. And
mm.
I think I check the time way more than I use a knife in any given day. So I just have grown to appreciate my watch more.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so other than just like being able to tell the time versus on your phone, um, there are instances where, similar to like where you wouldn't pull out your phone to use a flashlight in whatever task is at hand ergonomically. Same thing with checking the time, because people needed watches before phones existed, right? For certain activities, right? There's like dive watches, there's like field watches, all kinds of different watches, even dress watches, right?
Yeah.
Like it's the idea of you're at a
If you're in polite company.
more formal event, and you're with company, and you don't want the optics of like, oh, he's checking his phone, like kind of bored, that's kind of rude. So you can just like, know what time it is with a dedicated tool. And I think going into the just philosophy of EDC again, it's like having a dedicated tool for the job. A watch fits that purpose, and a watch fits that purpose.
I want to offer a third line of thought here for people specifically coming from the EDC side. I think there is we've also talked about it before, but it's you have the functionality as you were talking about before, and then you just kind of want to appreciate a piece of gear as a piece of gear, and then looking for ways to like minor optimizations, minor in the sense of, I appreciate that I'm wearing a watch, but maybe it could look a little bit cooler, or maybe it can do one additional function, like I can get an automatic so I don't ever have to change the battery ever. And then from there you springboard into, I appreciate the mechanics that go into something that's completely mechanical, never have to do any maintenance or never have to change a battery, and then just that feat of engineering. And then you appreciate the watch like you would appreciate a nice watch, a nice knife, like you would appreciate a nicer bag. It's just like small. You don't always have to jump like dive straight into a $10,000 Rolex or whatever. You can gradually find your pace, just like with the rest of your EDC gear. Try something out. Maybe you feel like field watches this year, maybe next year, maybe I'll try a dress watch. Maybe that's more my speed. And then start exploring or start deep diving down that way, and then discovering brands there, discovering more appreciation for that kind of watch, and then switching it up again. So just like how you would build and refine and use the rest of your gear, I think a watch is just like a valid piece of gear, just like everything else. It's just the functionality of telling the time can start from that base function and then springboard into all of the other nostalgic
so that premise, I think, just applies to all EDC things. It doesn't have to be watches. It could be the same thing with a knife. It's like, I don't carry a knife because I can just use my hands, or I can just use the keys that I have, or I can go to the kitchen and pick up scissors and like, right?
You ever open boxes with ever open boxes with a pen? You just like poke holes in the tape until it's
no, not yet.
True desperation mode. You pop a hole in the tape, and sometimes it breaks, allows the tape to split. But anyway, true desperation, no scissor mode.
Yeah, exactly. So now that hopefully people kind of get it in terms of just like, okay, maybe we're a little bit open-minded about the idea of using something other than our phone, and like just some other reasons, it taps into the idea of like having a dedicated tool for the job. 2 is 1, 1 is none, right? So you can have your phone and your watch and be able to tell the time with both. And then there's sort of like that, like in case your phone runs out of battery, or you're preserving the battery for the true function of your phone, which might be not telling the time. So there are a bunch of aspects to that. But now that we're sort of just like, all right, I'm in. I'm in. Let's. So what do you consider from a gearhead perspective, like when evaluating a watch? What are some qualities or attributes to look for, similar to how we might be like, oh, okay, well, I'm in the market for a knife. What do I look for? I think that same framework kind of applies to watches. Right? So for me, I think, well, this is because I have small wrists, but I think size is important. And then the style and use case, like, are you going to wear this watch? Like, does it fit with your style? And then you have things like the specs, right? And that can be just like its own
limitless
rabbit hole. Yeah. And then I think something more important with watches in particular compared to a bunch of other EDC gear is the price, because watches, as we mentioned, you already have your phone that can kind of do this, or you can just get a cheap watch. But watches are, at least now, kind of a luxury item and status symbol. They don't always have to be, but I think like beyond like $50 or $100, whatever, it's like, yeah, it's kind of is what it is. So
Yeah. So from those things you said, my ordering is a little bit different. I would go probably for
mhm.
style first. Like when people ask me about what watch to get, my first question is, have you seen anything that looks like something you would like? Number one. And number
Mhm.
two, um, since you're going to be the one wearing it, it's going to be on your wrist, and you're going to be the first and last person to look at it at the end of the day. Is it something you're going to enjoy looking at your wrist, or are you just wearing a watch for some other specific reason? So I think for me, style is number one. It's the self expression. It's the story. Like for
Mm.
me, um, I'm always reminded about the movie, my feelings, where I was when I saw the movies, how that character makes me feel as a person, like the attributes of like that super spy type thing, always in the back of my mind when I'm wearing, just like those small sentiments that all go into just when I look at it for the first time every time. It's the style and the it's always going to be number one for me, because I want something that when I look at it, I'm like, dang, I'm really happy I have this on my wrist. And then
Oh, that's
I
interesting.
I kind of trickle down from there, because the rest of it I can kind of fudge, like size and the specs and the type of movement. I can be okay with
Uh-huh.
pretty much anything. But first and foremost, this has got to be a watch that I personally like. I I feel is a representation of what, like, self-expression, and it represents what I feel like is something I like, or something I would prefer to carry, or be
Right.
seen carrying, or be
I'm
seen wearing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested in how much importance you put on this idea of like self-expression with watches, because I know you like other gear, but do you do the same amount of assigning value to that with other things, like with a knife or with a
I
backpack
do.
or even a flashlight? Because those are not, maybe a bag at most is like a fashion statement, or can be remotely close to that compared
Hmm.
to a watch. But I don't know, because I like, so for example, I go through a bunch of different knives, and yeah, some of them, there's like a design language that resonates with me, but I can also just use like a hella tactical knife and not be like, oh, this is just like, I can't do this because I'm not super tactical.
I guess it's more of the keepers for me. There is a
Uh-huh.
greater meaning on the ones that I keep and I choose to wear now. Of course, I have my regular Apple Watch. I have my basic G Shock. That's one of the first watches, like an affordable watch I bought early on. But
Hmm.
the ones that I really care about, the watches that are in my nice case and in a display case, those are going to be like more important to me in terms of the story behind them, or the
Mm.
milestones attached to them, like with the monster that I was talking about
Yeah.
in the other
Interesting.
episode. Yeah. So for me,
Okay.
the keepers are the ones that are have become a distillation of my self-expression, I guess, is the idea there. It's like, maybe, yeah, G-Shock, kind of like a blackout G-Shock, sure, is kind of me, but this one is really me, because it just happened to be blackout. It's kind of associated with a technical thing. It's associated with the movie I like, movies in general, the art of filmmaking and props. And like the other version of this Tag Heuer, the one that he used in the first three movies, this is the more collector's item. And this one is kind of like ties in with Adam Savage and his whole nerdery with Bourne also, and that whole other path of thought and experience and shared experience. It goes really deep for me. The ones that I keep have gone really, really deep for me, and it all
Yeah, I
boils down.
I
Yeah.
can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just so interesting to me because like I don't see anyone have such storytelling and connection to just like new knife day, you
Mm.
know? It's just like, oh yeah, it's like a cool steel and like it's fidgety. That's what I see most people talk about.
Yeah.
But if you contrast that to like the watch collecting community or something, yeah, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, I got this for my like a milestone or to celebrate something. It's just interesting to me that watches kind of have that function for some people,
It is interesting, right?
but it's not
Why
entirely practical.
it's also like the significance of a watch is also kind of like skewed a lot more versus like a knife or like a flashlight, right? Even if the flashlight can be like $20,000, one of a kind, cool fall, whatever. But then compare it to like a swatch that you got handed by your best friend or something that you would. I remember I watching a video
Yeah,
with who's a redheaded singer,
like Ed Sheeran or something.
Ed Sheeran. Okay, aside from there.
Oh,
So I was watching a
okay.
video with Ed Sheeran and he was talking
Uh-huh.
about his collection and he has this basic department store watch. And when he was asked the question of if you could lose all of your watches and keep one, which one would you keep? And he said that one. He has all of these expensive, really expensive luxury watches, but he's going to keep the
Mhm.
one that he and his best friend bought when he first started out in his career. That one story is enough for him to lose everything else and just keep that one watch. That story is powerful enough to overcome all the value he puts on all of his more expensive watches to keep the more affordable one that has the story that's like a core memory basically in his
I see.
collection. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm kind of formulating some thoughts just listening to this and kind of
Mhm.
thinking about it more. But I think watches have this ability to store a story with
Mm.
them over time because
Over
one
time.
watches exactly. So one watches are kind of like they've been around, okay? It's not like rectangular flashlights, the newest thing. Like that's tech, right? That goes
Mm.
like out of significance like very quickly as technology is innovating. And there is technology in watches too, but because they've been around for so long, I think people are able to think of them as, heirlooms or just, relics of the past or icons and that sort of thing, right? So that because they have this perceived longevity to them, that they would last for decades and be passed down for decades, then people want to attach significance to something and like legacy for something that lasts longer than them, which I don't think people do as much to something like a knife because with a knife you have to sharpen it, and that is almost in a way like it's not lasting a lifetime. I guess it could, but it will change and like diminish over time as you sharpen it and use it and that sort
Yeah,
of thing.
there is material
Uh,
that gets removed when you sharpen it. You know
right.
how my grandfather used to have a scout knife and it's down to like almost a toothpick width because of
Uh
how
huh.
much he sharpened it over his entire life. And it's basically just like you know how the awl from a Swiss Army knife. It's just this
Yeah.
narrow.
Yeah.
That's the main knife. That's it's been sharpened so much, like with non-professional tools, so much, just like on a grindstone or something, that the material has been reduced to just like this toothpick thin material. But
Right.
yeah, that's an interesting
And so
thing. Yeah, that
yeah,
watches have
because
that longevity, right? Yeah.
yeah, and to sort of add to your point on like knives being sharpened away, there's this thing in watch collecting, especially vintage watch collecting, which is its own thing, right?
Mm,
But they recommend that you don't polish watches that get scratched up over time because it removes some material, it changes the shape of things, and it makes it look new. When vintage watches are supposed to be like this representation of the passage of time and like all the stories that come with the wear and tear, which is like not rational at
mm.
all to me. Like it's all this like sentimental layer that's added on top of stuff, but it doesn't really make that much logical practical sense,
You wouldn't
but
keep
people have that.
damage. You wouldn't keep damage and scratches on your car, right? You would buff
Yeah,
right out.
I
You
guess
would
so.
buff that right out. But for a watch, it's unique because
Yeah, it's like
somehow it gets
patina.
somehow it gets tied into life's bumps and scrapes, and for some reason we associate those with stories and personal like adventure or personal stories that this one time like you I which is interesting also because one of my like my old Seiko, I remember I've bumped into so many things, but I remember the one time when I caught my wrist in the elevator. It closed faster than I could bring my hand
Mm,
in, so it closed on the watch and it created like a really deep gash on the case. And I remember that was like 12 years ago now, and I still remember the day that it happened. So I guess there is some truth to it, right? Like you remember those big moments or like those memorable things, even if it's in the appearance of a scratch. Yeah.
Or maybe not. I think you're just clumsy and got your hand caught in an
True. Who gets
elevator.
his hand
That's
caught in an elevator? That's true.
yeah. Okay, so that was kind of like a gigantic tangent, by the
Mm,
way, because we were talking about what should you look for when you're
mm,
considering a watch. So I think for the people who are just not on the sentimental level yet, they maybe don't have
true.
a watch that resonates with them yet. Maybe the first thing they should do is just have somebody gift them a watch, so then they're forced to appreciate that thing because, oh, it was the first watch I was gifted and like now it's important to me. So
Mm,
you could speed run that route if that happens. But otherwise, I think it's important to, like I said, look at size and then the style, right? Which I think is probably a better order that you said, where it's more important to think about getting a watch that you could see yourself wearing and that you enjoy,
mm,
just because it is like a very visual thing, right? The function of a watch is looking at it,
yes.
and so that's why I think design and aesthetics are probably equally, if not more important than the actual performance of it, like timekeeping. Because
Mm,
then, yes, just look at your phone, right? And then that's this whole other debate we can talk about later. But other than the style, I think size makes sense. And size has a big component of like, does it look good on you? But also, is it comfortable and practical? I think that's an important thing because you, similar to like a knife that's too big, it could be unwieldy or uncomfortable. So
mm,
that's why I personally value size a lot, especially since I have smaller wrists. It just limits what I can wear. Now that you've kind of identified what kind of looks good to you and where you're gonna wear it, then that kind of informs, well, can the performance match those use cases and situations, right? So it's going to be the movement inside, which is basically, the machinery and mechanisms by which time is being kept and tracked. Water resistance, I think, is important, especially in the context of everyday carry, just because you are likely to encounter water somehow, whether it's like rain, washing the dishes, going swimming, water sports out in the wild, that kind of thing.
mhm,
And then also, since a lot of EDC people think about things like runtime, like battery runtime or like edge retention, I think something similar in watches would be power reserve,
mhm,
if or battery life if it's a Quartz watch, right? And then lastly, we mentioned price, just because that frames things and like contextualizes things, um, and uh, makes it more clear like what options you have available to you,
yeah.
because a lot of people think about the budget first, then they look at the options rather than
Mm.
have a certain set of criteria they need, and then budget is last, unless you're just like balling, which some people are, but I don't think
Yeah,
I
that's
am.
always,
So
even with other EDC gear, it always starts with what's your budget, because like sure, you can want like this or that Rolex or AP watch, but then if you can't afford it, like maybe best to avert your eyes for now and make that something aspirational rather than,
yeah,
taking out a loan to invest in a watch that you may not even enjoy in the end, right? So part of it is the journey also.
yeah,
You don't want to waste your money right on the first watch you get and then you realize it's not for you.
I mean, arguably all watches are a waste of money, but
Well,
that
yeah.
is kind of that's kind of an insane take. I only mentioned that because you said something like invest in watches. That
Mm,
is there. That is also this whole other thing that we don't have to talk about right now.
yeah.
But just be careful of that. The idea
Don't.
that watches can be an investment.
Don't.
Yeah, they're just way better vehicles for investment. I don't recommend watches. I have I'm not a good investor then. I have a bunch of watches like right here. I'm looking at them, but I haven't made any money. I don't understand. Like it's not anyway. So yeah, you're mentioning that just like the whole concept of price and like budget, right? I
Mm,
think this kind of leads into the next set of subjects I wanted to talk about, which are basically that like everything I just explained, right, is debatable, and it
mm.
will depend. And there, it's funny because in the watch community, um, it gets so divisive. But I guess that happens to with any
Everything.
hobby, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of those debates is like budget watches versus luxury watches, and then
Mhm.
I guess a similar analog in EDC, more core EDC would be like budget blades versus like premium custom high end stuff.
Yeah.
They both like get the job done, right? Cutting the thing.
God, there's this is like a whole other nerdery thing, but remember the whole hoopla with Swatch and Omega, or is it
Omega, yeah,
And then now with
yeah.
Blancpain, and this whole devaluing Omega because oh no, it's just a plastic Swatch now. Like my
Hmm.
actual Speedy has just lost 30% of its value, when actually I would argue that bringing the idea, the concept of a luxury watch to something more accessible to more people, that one event made watches so much more exciting for such a long period of time when that whole event happened for me. I
Yeah,
was
so
yeah.
really quickly, for people who aren't familiar what Blancpain is or what Omega is or
Mhm.
Swatch, can you explain the moon swatch phenomenon that you're talking about
Yeah.
real quick?
So Omega and Blancpain are very elite Swiss makers making really high end luxury watches.
Yeah.
Um, and Swatch is kind of like has had a history of being a more affordable budget plastic quartz type of watch.
Yeah, just
And
like a
then
fashionable, cheaper watch.
yeah, it was a fashion statement back when I was growing up in the 90s. It's like there was this
Yeah.
pop swatch thing that you snap onto your wrist. They were very quirky, fun, childlike colors, and very quirky and just affordable
Hmm.
watches. But they were Swiss made, and actually Swiss Swatch GmbH, the parent company, actually now owns a lot of the luxury watch brands, which is kind of
Yes.
ironic in
Yeah.
itself.
Swatch Group. Yeah.
But anyway, um, somehow there was this idea that Swatch would take one of the most iconic luxury watches of all time, the Omega Speedmaster, and they would kind of swatchify it and turn it into like using Swatch's own materials. They call it bioceramic, but it's kind of like it
Yeah.
feels plasticky to the hand. And then that just kind of like blew up the whole conversation about luxury versus budget, right? Because this is a
Yes.
budget
Well,
brand,
because yeah, it did not cost the same as an Omega Speedmaster, which is
like
I'm guessing
2000,
around six to
3000.
7,000.
Oh
Wait,
no,
is
brand
it?
new. Brand new? Oh yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
and like
Yeah, yeah,
not the reduced, like the full fat Speedmaster,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah,
watch that went to the moon. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then they were selling it for how much was it? It was 150, 170, something like that. And then
Hmm.
all of the people who own the actual Omega Speedmaster were like, "Oh my god, they're making a mockery of the brand. They're making a mockery of our iconic watch, the watch that went to the moon, and they're making a joke out of it. This is now a budget kid toy watch." And then meanwhile, to the rest of the world, everybody was like, they started getting interesting. They started people who aren't really into watches were like, why is this such a big deal to the watch people? Oh, this is what Omega is. Oh, this is the watch that went to the moon. Wow, I'm suddenly I want a piece of this now, and it's kind of more
Hmm.
affordable. I can probably have a piece of this story with me, and I am still wearing a Swiss watch, and that has this association, that has this expression of luxury in its own way. I mean, it's not going to be a $7,000 Speedmaster, but it still has an Omega tag on it. It still has the Swatch tag on it. It still comes with a story of the Speedmaster and all
Right.
its history. So there now
So
it
you're a
became
fan of
this.
this whole thing.
I was a fan of the of what
Okay.
happened. I'm
Uh-huh.
not a fan of the watch personally because it's not something I would
Sure.
personally use. But this when this event was happening, more people in my circle of who do not care about gear, who do not care about watches, suddenly became this became a really big conversation. I've had wives and girlfriends ask me,
Sure.
why is my husband suddenly going crazy over he's asking me to call all of the branches in the Philippines looking for who carries a stock of this thing that's been sold out in like 10 different countries, and why is this such a
Yeah.
big deal? And then I have to tell the whole story of everything. But just that phenomenon I think was so
Uh-huh.
interesting, and I think became introduced so many people into the hobby, brought so many casual or younger people into the hobby or into the whole. Yeah,
Okay. Sorry. I'm a
go ahead,
little
go
bit
ahead.
skeptical that of the claim that it brought a lot of people into the hobby.
Mhm,
Maybe it had some hype and attention towards collecting watches in general, but I
mhm.
don't know if those people actually ended up appreciating watches in the context of in the same style that we are right now,
Mm,
because it might have just been they wanted to buy what everybody else had on Instagram that everybody else
true.
was talking about. So that's like FOMO and hype cycles,
Yeah, yeah,
which I don't know if we're like the biggest fans of that, but it is part of just watch collecting, probably more so than like limited bag drops and, you know, whatever goes on in the EDC drop culture too. It's
yeah.
probably worse in watches. But anyway, I just wanted to like voice that because you're talking about like, oh yeah, the moon swatch brought so many people into watch collecting, but like it did not for any of my friends. The like my friends who knew about watches were the only ones that knew about the moon swatch thing.
Oh
So
well, I do have some anecdotes of the opposite of that. Like one
okay,
guy, the guy who specifically I was talking about, his girlfriend was asking me about where to get them because it was sold out
yeah,
most of Asia really, and most of the Philippines at the time. And then as a result of that, I was stuck when she was finally able to get one for him. He started getting interested in watches that got away for him. He's like, now that I
mm,
have this, maybe I should pursue that Seiko turtle that I wanted like once as a kid. And then he did just
mm,
that. And then he's like, oh, all of these new G Shocks are coming out. I've already bought two watches. What's one more? And I've had more than a few stories of people like that. Like that whole conversation about watches and people talking about their personal history with Omega, people talking about their history with James Bond in the movie in friends of mine who had that crossover as well of movies and fashion and
yeah.
watches, and then people who grew up with Swatch, like people around my age. It all started like becoming this Venn diagram of interest and discussion. And anyway, long story short, one of the most affordable budget brands in watches and one of the most expensive luxury house brands for watches somehow found a way to make a relationship and to put a watch out there that kind of was like the best of both worlds but not really, and it
Yeah,
caused people,
not really.
and since it's on extreme ends of the budget versus luxury, it caused people to have extreme discussions about the whole topic. So yeah, so there is that's basically the whole story there.
So you mentioned that some people were interested in watches because of this like collab event, but
Mm,
I've noticed that a lot of people already wear watches, but they're Apple watches or just smart watches in general. Like, do you think that that counts as a watch? Like you, yeah, you're one of
yeah,
them. I tried
yeah.
it. So I
Mm,
tried to use an Apple Watch, and I think of Apple watches and smartwatches in general as like tool watches because
mm,
they're not dress watches, right? Probably not feel watches. Well, some of them actually, but I think of them as tool watches because they serve a specific function that only that kind of watch can do that other watches can't do, right? So to
yeah.
me, by definition, yeah, that's a tool watch. So like Apple Watch Ultra, hell yeah, that's a tool watch,
Mm,
especially since it also has like specs and the durability like kind of built in.
mm.
But I've just noticed, like when I went to SHOT Show, I'm looking around. I'm like, yeah, these people probably wear cool watches, but it's like most people are either wearing an Apple Watch or a luxury watch, and I think that's so interesting. And an
Mm.
Apple Watch kind of is a luxury watch of all the smartwatches because they are pretty expensive
It,
um,
yeah,
in
back
the
back
scheme.
here, it's a status symbol. It's a status
The
symbol
Apple
so much.
Watch?
Yeah, it is so much
Oh,
so
interesting.
that the fakes have almost been perfected. I am seeing almost one-to-one perfect Apple Watch Ultras in the wild, costing about $100. It's
That's
really it,
interesting.
and even they figured out a way how to make the interface of Apple look
Hmm.
like how it does on the real thing. So it has become a whole status symbol thing. But I do agree with you that it is a tool watch. It is a function first. At least it was for me because the main reason
Hmm.
I got this thing was number one, just a minor quirk of being a watch owner, like an automatic watch owner. I got tired of not wearing my watch for a weekend and it dying because the power reserve was only up to 42 hours and there's 48 hours in a weekend. I forget to wear it
Right.
during the weekend. I take it off on the Friday, wear it on the Monday, and have to reset it again. That got kind of annoying. And the fact that a smartwatch pairs with your smartphone, which is always on, which is always connected to the internet, so it has perfect time, that was a
Hmm.
really good convenience for me. But the main thing for me was compared to like normal fitness trackers and fitness bands, this looked a lot better. I mean,
Okay.
it's kind of like it's got its own, like it's kind of boring. It's just like a square. They haven't changed the
Yeah.
design for a while, but it looked better to me than most of the fitness trackers or fitness bands that came before. It also is a lot smarter than those, but in reality, I'm only using it for its timer capabilities, for its notifications, and most importantly, its alarm. Don't underestimate the buzzing, vibrating thing on your wrist's ability to wake you up in the morning.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that is the single most useful function for me of the smartwatch. The alarm is just so effective at waking me up, even if I'm getting catching like a 5 minute nap.
Hmm.
The moment it starts buzzing, it's kind of like a primal effect on me. That the vibration is so effective at waking me up. But
Right.
yeah, that's just my
Oh,
personal use for the
interesting.
smartwatch. Yeah.
Okay, so I tried using an Apple Watch just to get ahead of my fitness. We probably touched on this in our like New
Mm.
Year, New You, New EDC kind of
Mhm.
episode earlier in the year. But when I tried an Apple Watch, I first of all I wore it on my other wrist, so I was wearing two watches at the same time. Just because like I am so used to wearing like a real watch, even though it was also a digital watch. Like when I was at the gym, I was wearing this. Um, this Casio.
Mm.
This is like a cheap beater
Classic.
Casio. Yeah, on one wrist, and then an Apple Watch on the other wrist. And it's funny that you mentioned that like you got tired of automatic watches, like you know, running out of power reserve.
Mhm.
One, I would say just buy a watch with a better power reserve,
Sure.
like 55 to 72 hours. Okay, because the watch I'm wearing right now, the manual one, that's a 72-hour power reserve. So like weekends
Wow,
are fine
that's a
for me.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's like manual one, so I have to do it myself. But that's a different thing. But I just did not like the fact that if I was wearing the watch, the Apple Watch rather, the smartwatch, it would just die before bedtime.
Mm.
And my main use case was to monitor my sleep.
Right,
So it's
right.
kind of annoying that I would have to like take it off and charge it to be able to wear it while I'm sleeping. And now I just like don't bother with them.
I've kind of gotten used to charging it even as early as at 50% or 40%. I don't really let it
Hmm.
get down to 20% and then it dies overnight.
Yeah.
That said, it has gotten pretty annoying to charge it every 1.5 days. So I'm
Right.
kind of leaning back towards a mechanical watch or a quartz at least that's like these tags. They are keeping like some of the most amazing time I've had in a watch. Well, it's mainly because they're quartz, which is do you want to kind of explain quartz versus mechanical and why a quartz would be more accurate in that sense?
I will try.
Yeah,
But basically, a quartz, it uses a battery
yeah.
and a quartz crystal oscillator. Okay, just imagine like it's a little computer. It's just basically a little computer that runs on a battery, and that's how it keeps the time. It
Mhm.
moves like the seconds hand to keep the time, versus a mechanical movement where the energy is stored in like a mainspring, like gears turning, and that's what moves the seconds hand. And that could be either like you wind up the watch yourself, or there's a moving rotor in an automatic watch that will, like, as you move your wrist, it will move the rotor and that will do the winding of the
Mhm.
movement. So that's kind of like the basic explanation. It's sort of like you have something that's purely analog and purely mechanical versus something that has like computer chips and a battery to do analog timekeeping, or actually sometimes in digital timekeeping as well for quartz watches.
And just to take it back a little bit, it's the fact that it uses a battery means like its lifespan is or its operating time is measured in years, right? Because it doesn't take much
Yeah.
power to keep the seconds running and
Yeah.
accurately, right? Because it's like a specific electrical function to get the ticking to go, right, on a quartz
Hmm.
watch versus an automatic watch where since it's all physical pieces moving together, there's friction, there's gravity. Isn't it true that the way you position a watch, like face up or on its side or face down,
Yeah.
can also affect the like minor variations in how accurate the seconds
Yeah.
becomes? Yeah.
So that's why a lot of watches or like the higher end watches, they're like tested in multiple positions to
Mm.
maintain a certain range of accuracy, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of starting to appeal to me to go back to just like a regular old quartz. Even like
Mm.
would a G-Shock technically count as a quartz watch?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Right. It's a
It,
digital
and it's
quartz,
like
right?
and solar, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that one it might have been solar.
Just from the sheer convenience, because I haven't changed the
Mm.
battery on this for like 7 years now, and the lifespan is supposed to be like 3 years. So compared to a
Oh wow.
day and
Hmm.
day and a half of power and it's starting to annoy me also because I don't want to fiddle. I just turned off all the notifications, but some of them still kind of get through, and it kind of bugs me that I'm now associating being bothered by that notification buzz.
Yeah, that's another reason why I
Yeah,
didn't want to use smartwatches. But again, I'm like the type to like really not want to be on my phone unless I'm working on it.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So it's
So that's
starting.
another appeal of why I like mechanical watches versus Apple watches or smartwatches, just
Hmm.
because it's one less like computer that your
True.
attention goes towards. And I like that an analog watch, or even honestly even a quartz watch, just like a dedicated, like less convenient thing, less convenient function, is there to take to just so you're just like more mindful of like phone usage and like what you're actually doing in the moment, which is just like checking the time and only checking the time. But
Mhm.
then it also sometimes, especially depending on what I'm wearing, it's checking the time or just appreciating the watch I'm wearing, be like, damn, this watch is sick. Wait, what am I doing again? So it's like it's a
Yeah.
wash.
So
Yeah.
that's I think that those are there's a lot of arguments to be made on going back to what we started talking about at the beginning. Finding your specific purpose of where you're going to be using your watch can
Mm-hmm.
inform the type of watch. And here are our personal anecdotes of like why a smartwatch has been useful, why it hasn't been useful, why
Yeah.
an automatic would be more useful for certain people, or why a quartz can be more effective. Oh, just as
Mm-hmm.
an anecdote, back to these tags, the quartz chronographs. I haven't actually experienced a automatic chrono. Those are kind
Oh,
of rarer, right? Or
they're
like they're more
expensive.
expensive,
Yeah,
just
they're really expensive.
because chronograph watches have all of these dials and timers to be able to track time accurately, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it has a heritage of like built on racing and tracking lap
Yeah.
times and split times and all of that. So you kind of want to be as accurate as possible when you're dealing with timing specific things, right? And
Yeah.
generally, you kind of want to lean towards quartz for that, just for the utmost accuracy. Would that be a fair assessment for a
Yeah, if
quartz
you're
for chrono?
considering quartz versus mechanical, not even just a chrono, but just like watches or a chronograph, but watches in general, quartz is probably going to be more accurate.
Mm,
And we're talking like I have a quartz watch. So this is a Creedor watch, and
mm.
I don't know if it's going to focus, but this is like, yeah.
Oh,
So
nice.
you
Oh,
can maybe
the blue
see
hands
that
one.
that it's just like ticking. Um, and this is, I think, like plus or minus 10 seconds a year, right?
Mm.
Whereas you might be lucky to get plus or minus 10 seconds a day with a mechanical automatic watch.
Yeah.
So there's like an extreme accuracy there, but then just some people lose like the romantic,
Mm.
analog feeling of a mechanical watch because they're like, oh, that's like a computer. But
Yeah.
yes, one of the aside from just like runtime, right, or like power reserve,
Mm.
one of the benefits of quartz is its extreme accuracy.
So now that we've talked about different scenarios and different types of watches that you would use in those scenarios, what would you say is the best watch for EDC? Now that people are on
uh
board, we're kind of interested. I want to buy my first
yeah.
watch. What's it going to be for the first one? What's it going to be for ADC?
Okay, so before giving like a specific recommendation of watch model,
Mm,
I think I'm gonna go back to like those kind of frameworks of like size and um, movement, and those specs, those kinds of things that make sense. So for an everyday watch, I actually made a video that went kind of viral because it was like very controversial, where I said Quartz watches are better for EDC actually.
Mm.
And the reason for that is for EDC, a lot of people value just like something that gets the job done in the best way possible. And since we mentioned this is assuming that you're using a watch to accurately keep time, then the Quartz watch will excel at that
Mm.
because it's just more accurate, right?
Right, right.
Um, then there's also some of the convenience factors that we mentioned about like if your watch dies, then you have to like set the time, and that's like it's a whole mess.
Mm.
But with Quartz watches, you basically it's one of those like set it and forget it type movements, and that I think would appeal to people who just want to pick up their watch and it's accurate and they don't have to fuss with it. So that's why I think it's another reason why I think it's better for every day. And then it's also generally Quartz watches are cheaper,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is something to consider if it's something you want to use every day for all kinds of activities where you maybe don't want to do that with a really expensive luxury watch.
Mm.
And then Quartz watches are also pretty durable and pretty low maintenance in that regard. So I would say if you're just getting into it and you have this EDC mentality of I want the best performing tool for the job, then consider a Quartz watch.
Do you have any specific recommendations?
Well, we kind of talked about the G-Shock
Mm-hmm.
and this Casio. So like, yeah, this Casio, I forget what this is called.
That's the Wave Scepter, isn't it?
No. This is like it's a really,
It's a
oh yeah,
AW.
A168W. That's
There
what
you go.
this is. And this is like, I don't know, like $25. And it's just a very cool, like retro kind of chic look to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then for EDC, a lot of people wear G-Shocks, Casio G-Shocks. So another Casio, but so here's mine. This is
Mm.
the all steel version
Mine's
in
the
like a
polymer,
gold tone.
all polymer
Yeah.
version instead, which is this is what I bought this for about $85 at the time.
Hmm.
Probably cheaper now. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are good for EDC just because they have durability, accuracy, water resistance, legibility, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I guess to make it more general again, like what are it's we should maybe answer the question: what are the qualities of the best everyday carry watch,
Mm.
rather than just what is the best one? Because it's always going to depend, right?
Yeah.
It's like I think it's one that fits you well, and maybe one that's even a little bit on the smaller side. So the reason I like smaller watches for EDC is that they have less wrist presence in such a way that they're less likely to get in the way of you living your life and doing the things you're trying to do. So that's why, like, my watch, this is a 37 or 36.7 millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the biggest one, but it's not the smallest either. And I
Mm-hmm.
already have small wrists, but like you could probably rock this with your bigger wrist. But the idea is that it doesn't get in the way. It fits under a cuff, and it's just not like unwieldy and cumbersome when I'm doing stuff with my hands. Then there's also like durability, right? You want something that's tough enough to take just like the rough and tumble of everyday carry, just how you would with a flashlight, pocket knife, whatever. And that's probably not a moon swatch. It's probably not bioceramic plastic.
Mm.
So like you can look into really strong resin polymers like your G-Shock, or like stainless steel is pretty common, and then titanium is also a popular choice. So just for the same reasons why we would use it on a knife.
I think it's also really nice that because of Quartz, because of smartphones, sorry, because of smartwatches, there is just like an infinite selection now. You can get a
Mm.
basic Casio for, like you said, for $20 for your A168W. Slightly above that, you can get the more durable Casio models, and then slightly above that, you can get into the G-Shock territory, and then slightly above that, there's like an infinite there's an infinite depth of variation and budget for you to be able to choose from. So it's really important to imagine, like, what is your day to day like? Like a person who's working from home, like us, rarely goes out, is going to have a completely different use case from somebody who works heavy machinery in their day to day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or like
Mm-hmm.
is a gym rat and is gonna be in the gym more often than not, or like a traveler is, or somebody who has to go into an office. Everybody is gonna have a different primary function that they need.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to find what that specific primary function is. So if you're, if you're like us sitting at home comfortably, not doing really much physical activity, choose anything that's gonna look nice when you look at it, right? And then you can start building appreciation or going down that specific rabbit hole. But then if you're a diver, then you have your own little niche to carve out, or you have your own little rabbit
Yeah,
hole to
but
go down.
nobody is a diver. Nobody actually dives.
True.
Uh, but you're making a good point about like the style of it that fits your lifestyle. But I think an important part of an everyday watch, an EDC watch, especially if you're the type of person to just want one and like have just a one watch collection and not
Mm.
collect a bunch of different ones for those different use cases you're describing, you
Mhm.
can identify a primary sort of use case, but versatility in just general versatility of the watch, I think, is important in terms of styling. So I would recommend like a sporty dress watch or a dressy sport watch.
Mm.
You can like wear certain types of watches that have been around for a long time, so they have like this timeless quality to them. But for people that really don't know what like a sport watch is or a dress watch is, or
I
like a
think
field watch, I can show some
I
examples.
think this would be
Um,
categorized as a sport watch, right? It's not really a
the
dress
chrono?
watch. Yeah, this tag.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah,
like
that's a
this has
sports
this
watch.
old '90s
Yeah,
sporty watch design. Yeah,
yeah.
Rolex
So
Submariner is probably really popular. The most popular sport watch of all time. The
yes,
Rolex Submariner.
yes, yeah. So that kind of dive watch, everything sort of looks like that. Um,
Yeah.
and the watch that I recommended or I made a video on that kind of went viral is the Seiko 5 SNX S79,
Mm,
right? And this is like a sporty dress watch in
dress. Yeah.
that. So I should probably explain what does sport mean and what does dress
Yeah,
mean.
yeah. I was just about to ask, what is
Yeah,
a dressier watch?
yeah. So dressy watches are usually thinner, smaller, and it's a dress watch because you can wear it with like formal attire. It will fit under a dress shirt cuff, that kind of
Mm,
thing. And it has a less aggressive and like presentation to it. There's a lot of polish to it usually,
mm,
as opposed to brushed finishing. So it's like shinier and just looks more refined and sophisticated. But then something that's sporty might lean in the opposite direction, where it will have brushed finishes so that if it scratches, it's not as noticeable.
mhm,
Um, it just looks more rugged that way. And then it also might have something like loom, so you can read it in the dark,
mm.
and it would have probably better water resistance because it's designed to go all conditions. And
In
most likely,
sports.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And most likely it would be on a bracelet as opposed to like a leather strap.
Mm, right, right.
Because the leather strap is kind of dressier, can't get wet, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. But there are lots of examples of that kind of versatility. So that's kind of what I would recommend. And there's a term that watch collectors use to describe a daily watch or an everyday watch.
Mm.
They call it go anywhere, do anything. So GADA watches.
Gotta
And
watch
those
this.
are
Okay.
watches that it's like the one kind of watch that you can wear that's tough enough to handle like all of the stuff you might throw at it, but also it goes with everything in terms of styling. So it's very
Mm.
versatile. So it's like the one watch you can wear to anything.
I want to offer my suggestion of field
Mhm.
watches as an option for an everyday
Yeah.
watch. So you mentioned sport watches, like what would look like this on a bracelet, and
Hmm.
a little not as formal, not as thin. It's a bit more bulky to handle more activities. I
Yeah.
would recommend a field watch just because it has a lot of ties with EDC historically, like its
Yeah.
military and military inspiration and that functionality first purpose of watches, because field watches obviously were designed for the field. That's where it comes from,
Hmm.
right? Officers watches, field watches, And I am gonna dive right into a story of this watch, which I got from you actually. So
Oh,
this
Redux
is
Courage.
yeah. So this is the Redux Courage, which is short for courage. Um,
Uh,
this is kind of like a little EDC enthusiast level type thing because it is based on a military watch. This is a Pilot 1A type of watch, which was worn. Was it World War II that they were wearing this style of this watch? It focused mainly on a very clean dial, very legible. Because as a pilot,
right.
you don't want to be distracted by so many things when you look at your watch and
Hmm.
time
Yeah,
telling
like
and
notifications.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And just a little bit story behind this watch. This is kind of like very early EDC promotional material. This was in all of your carries very early on.
Yeah, that was a Kickstarter watch with a
Yeah,
micro brand.
yeah.
Yeah.
And anecdotally, all of your photos in the early days of EDC, I know people personally who got
Hmm.
into EDC and who got into watches because of this specific watch, because of your
Oh,
specific
interesting.
photos. I know at least two people who were like, Bernard, I have this watch because of Bernard's
Oh, damn.
Redux watch, and that goes for
Pre-influencer age.
I know,
Yeah.
and it goes for a few other things like you put hand gray carabiners on the map for a few of the
Hmm.
people I know in EDC. Um, and yeah, so like this is of kind of like an enthusiast level distillation EDC microbrand level type thing because this is titanium. It's on a NATO strap, which is also military inspired, and it's designed to be more secure on your wrist. It hangs onto the case of the watch in a specific way where it's designed to be very very secure on your wrist.
Yeah. If one
And
of the spring bar breaks, then the strap will catch the watch head without it like flying off.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
of course, in a situation where these watches were used for in the field during combat, you definitely don't want to lose your watch in the middle of action, right? So
Right.
yeah, so I would recommend like a field watch or something along those lines. There are more casual versions of like a field watch, and there are more like serious versions of it, like more true to their military styling or military functionality. But I think that look fits a lot of EDC aesthetics, fits a lot of EDC functionality, and if you can find the right one and like the right microband, it can also fit like that nerdiness about the materials and the assembly and like the little
Yeah,
details
yeah.
like using titanium in the clasp and in all of these rings and everything. So yeah.
Yeah. So if we're gonna steer the conversation towards field watches for a bit while we're
Mm,
kind of discussing some recommendations, I
mhm,
can think of like on the lower end. And by lower end, I mean in terms of price, not in terms
mhm,
of quality, right? So
mhm,
lower end field watches, you could look at Timex Expedition Field,
mm. Or the
and then
weekender.
also, uh, oh yeah, I guess so.
Oh, that's more
It's
sporty, isn't it?
no, it's not. It's not necessarily sporty. I would say it's just more like casual.
Casual field watch
Yeah, because it,
ish.
it has like the Arabic numerals instead of like
Right, 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 right.
batons, right? Or
Sure.
Roman numerals. So Timex Expedition Field,
Mhm.
also Seiko 5 SNK was
Mm.
809. That was like the classic
The
field watch.
classic, yeah.
I don't know if you can really get them as easily anymore because it's such an old, it's like quite old now.
Mm.
Um, but those are like two pretty common recommendations, and those
Yeah.
are around like $100. Um, and
Bertucci
then
is
oh
like
yeah, Bertucci, yeah,
is an entire brand of field watches.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like the
yeah,
field watches all the way down for Bertucci.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I have one. It's just in that room. I don't have it on the desk, so I can't show it.
Yeah.
Then if you go a little bit higher in price and you're looking at micro brands, so
Mhm.
we kind of talked. Sorry, we kind of talked about budget watches and luxury watches. In
Mm.
between are micro brands, which are these smaller brands that are kind of like independent, but they use off the shelf parts and have their own like design language and maybe not like long provenance or cultural history or associated with it,
Mhm.
but a lot of the value or appeal of micro brands is the amount of value you get in terms of functionality, aesthetics, and access to the brand, and maybe impact in their product development roadmap and design stuff, because
Mhm.
they might be on Kickstarter, like the Redux was, where you can
Yeah.
like stretch goal to like get a certain dial type or configuration that you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's really fun for enthusiasts. And since we're talking about field watches and Microbrands, I guess Ridge has this field watch that I think
Mm.
is a great value.
I love
At
it.
like,
I
what
actually
was it,
honestly really love it.
275,
Yeah.
275, 295, something like that. But this is a grade 2 titanium case, sapphire sandwich,
Automatic.
actually. Um, it's automatic with a Miyota 9 series movement. So it's
Yeah.
like slim automatic, 4 hertz tick rate. So it's a smoother sweeping second hand. And I have it
Mhm.
here on a
I
just a
have mine
standard
on the
NATO
rubber
strap.
strap. Yeah.
Yeah, mine's on a NATO strap, and it's all chalked up because I actually like went to Joshua Tree and climbed boulders with this outside on, because I
Cool.
think
Cool.
it's lightweight, legible, and durable. So this is an option. And then I think if you're gonna go into a little bit higher up into like entry level luxury, then like Hamilton, yeah,
Oris.
Hamilton khaki, yeah,
Yeah.
um,
It is a
and
really,
then
really popular type of watch, isn't it? Like across the
yeah.
spectrum, more so than most, even.
Yeah. And then in luxury, I have my Rolex Explorer 2 that
Mm.
has a story. But I think this episode has gone quite long. So
Yeah,
I'll
sure, sure.
save that for a different video, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
So we've talked a lot about watches, and people are hopefully bought into why a watch should be a part of their EDC. Is there any reason why it should just walk away at this point after listening to us talk about watches, our love for watches for an hour?
yeah. So as a watch collector, I've always had interest in watches
Hmm.
ever since I started like getting into EDC. And back then I did have just like giant Seiko 5s, like 42 millimeter. I don't know what I was thinking as a teenager. I guess that was the trend. And like I had a grail watch of the Zinn EZM1. It's like a German,
Mm.
like sick military watch. But anyway, I think even with all this enthusiasm, I don't think watches can be for everyone, just because like I mentioned earlier, they are kind of a luxury, because like if you feel that your phone can kind of cover that, that's fine. But I think there are a
Mm.
lot of us who just appreciate like well designed gear and like purpose driven tools and that sort of thing, and watches are a great way to sort of celebrate some of those qualities.
Mhm.
And it is just another part of an EDC, and it just affords so many of the things that we like about EDC in general.
Yeah.
But it can get expensive. It can be kind of like more stress than it's worth. Um, yeah, because I think it's just because they can be so expensive.
Mm.
And but you know, you could always like collect budget watches, I guess.
Mm.
Um,
I'm proposing like an alternative to it.
mhm.
Instead of choosing to be into the hobby or choosing not to be, a lot of the times in a lot of stories, people are get into it just as a matter of story and heirloom. Like
Mm,
you, I know you have a lot of watches that come like were handed down to you by your dad, right?
yes. Yeah.
And I have like I didn't get to have that experience. My dad passed away when I was a bit younger, and in my journey of EDC, I tried to kind of I get part of the reason I'm still in love with watches, like on a much more minor note, is because since I didn't get to have that story between father and son, I
Mm,
have gotten to experience that from other avenues, which made me fall in love with gear even more. Just as an example, so um, we were just talking about Redux, and we kind of helped promote the brand. Like you helped promote the brand definitely
yeah.
because you reached to a bunch of people, and in the founder of Redux, just to show appreciation for our coverage or for our help, he offered to send me one of the newest ones um, that they made. This is the Honor model that they just finished a Kickstarter recently, and
Wait, he didn't send me one.
yeah, so I
Okay.
was kind of just like I was kind of just like we kind of helped them on their journey there. But this is actually the first time somebody had given me a watch.
Oh,
So
really?
I
Okay.
actually, when he made that offer, it was like I was turning it down at first, but then the order went through, and I emailed him and his wife and was like thanking them, and I told them
Mhm.
the same story, that I didn't have a father growing up to have that experience of being handed down a watch, and this is kind of just like a minor thing in our industry. We get samples from brands, but suddenly this became like a really important thing to me because I've never
Mm.
gotten that experience. The closest I got in that I had to that story was like inheriting or getting this watch from you, because this is
Yeah.
kind of like a lot of where my EDC journey started. And
Right.
just to bring that home, I the person I bought this tag from, I got it from an eBay auction. He sent a note with it saying that he was a retired pilot and he was just getting rid of all of his like excess. He didn't want to
Yeah.
keep any collection anymore, and he said that he was just looking. He put it up on auction. He was so happy that it went to just another born fan as
Fan.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now I have three separate stories of three really really important watches to me, even though I didn't get to have that experience of it wasn't really my choice. I mean, one of them is my choice to get into watches, but I got part of that story of three separate life events, and now it's now part of my story. And I
Right.
think, yeah, just as an alternative to why you should or you shouldn't get into watches, sometimes you become
Yeah.
part of a story.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think the question was maybe phrased or like framed in a weird way. It's just like, why shouldn't you get into watches? And I
Mm,
think in my answer, just because it can be an expensive thing, that's not really about should you get a watch or not. That's really about like should you buy into the hype cycles and like watch investing and that sort of thing, because that's where I
mm,
think a lot of the negativity comes from in
right.
the watch enthusiast community, because
Or any
those
enthusiast
people,
community.
yeah, right, it's like
Yeah.
if you're just like flipping stuff or you're looking at things speculatively as investments, or you just want to get in on the hype but you have no actual like intention or connection to what you're buying, then it's like that doesn't that's not really a hobby, right?
Mm,
And I think there are so many reasons why you could get into watches if you enjoy them, because like all other hobbies and EDC, there's this level of um, community building and, yeah, like finding your community, your fellow fans of certain types of watches, or like collectors of the same interests as you, and also the whole like identity formation and self-expression. All of that you can kind of get from buying and owning and using and collecting and appreciating and sharing these things, that
mm,
I think is just hard to come by this day and age, especially among guys. But um, yeah,
yeah.
so a lot of good reasons to
Yeah.
get a watch. Yeah. So if I were to look at my watch now, I would realize that I think we're out of time on this episode.
Speaking of
Yeah.
keeping time, yeah.
That just about wraps it up for today's episode. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. And if you did, please consider subscribing. If you're listening through a podcast service and you really enjoy what we do here, please consider leaving a review and a positive rating, as it would really help the podcast. You can follow us on social media for more content daily on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and all of that will be linked below. And if you want to be a part of our EDC community, feel free to hop into our Facebook group or Discord server, where we do have a watch channel for
Mm.
more real time discussion with other EDCers. Lastly, if you have any feedback for us or questions you want answered on the show, you can shoot us an email at podcast@everydaycarry.com. So thank you for listening to Carried Away. I'm Bernard.
And then Mikey getting carried way too away on this episode.
Yeah. And until the next time, you can cut that out.
Peace.
Peace.